On this Tuesday night, the latest explanation of 3 of those flying objects.
There's no need to panic.
The White House now says they may have been harmless. How the Prime Minister is responding and the difficulty recovering them. As rescues become more rare in Turkey, concerns mount for the health of the people left homeless. Much needed remedies for Canada's ailing healthcare system.
It truly is a crisis.
Atlantic Canada's innovative prescriptions. And the state funeral for a firecracker mayor.
She was always right.
Honoring the incomparable Hurricane Hazel McCallion.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the latest information emerging about the 3 objects shot from the sky over Canadian and American airspace by American fighter jets. We still don't know what they were, and now the White House says the leading explanation is they may have been harmless and had nothing to do with espionage or intelligence gathering.
These could be tied to commercial or research entities and benign.
Parts of the first object that was spotted, the one that was identified as a Chinese spy balloon, have been recovered after it was shot down off the coast of South Carolina. U.S. authorities say it carried equipment that was clearly for intelligence surveillance. The other 3 mystery objects, said to be different in size and shape, still haven't been recovered, and no photos of them have been released. The White House says they were shot down out of an abundance of caution, but if they really were harmless, was shooting them down an overreaction? Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
It's the biggest recovery yet. Key electronics from the Chinese spy balloon, including up to 12 meters of the antenna, found off the coast of South Carolina.
We know that our defense and intelligence departments are analyzing every piece of this.
Any debris from the other suspected balloons, thought to be the size of a car, shot down over Lake Huron, Alaska, and Yukon, yet to be recovered. But the search for the debris facing deep water and frigid temperatures.
We have deployed a number of aircraft to assist in that recovery effort. I want to indicate that the terrain is extremely rugged, it is extremely remote.
The Lake Huron shoot-down required 2 missiles from a U.S. fighter jet.
On the 4th one over Lake Huron, first shot missed, second shot hit. In this case, the missile landed harmlessly in the water of Lake Huron.
The origins for the 3 UFOs starting to become more clear. The White House saying they're likely commercial objects that did not come from a foreign government or a spy agency.
There's strong consideration that these objects are indeed benign.
Americans believe the balloon.
The Prime Minister non-committal on if he agrees with the American assessment.
There's a range of different balloons that seem to be in different sizes and different numbers.
So they have cause to be annoyed with this.
But the former head of CSIS believes it's premature to take any explanation off the table.
If it's too early for us to say it's military, it's also too early for us to say it's civilian. We either know or we don't know. So I think we need to keep all of our options open.
NORAD announced this afternoon that it turned its attention away from balloons and back onto what it traditionally does, Donna, when on Monday they intercepted Russian fighter jets and bombers off the coast of Alaska.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister was in Ukraine today. Melanie Joly met with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as he pushes for more support for his country's fight against Russia.
Nice to meet you. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you too.
In a statement, Zelensky said the two discussed further security and defense cooperation and that Canada's support of the Ukrainian army is invaluable. While that meeting was happening, NATO defense ministers gathered in Brussels. The head of NATO says almost 1 year since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there are no signs Russian President Vladimir Putin is preparing for peace. On the contrary. And as Crystal Gamansing reports, NATO members are being asked to ramp up production of ammunition and military equipment.
What's that? You see?
Ukraine's defense minister shared something close to his heart with the cameras. His country's wish for fighter jets. A light moment in a high-stakes, high-profile gathering of allies.
The Kremlin is still betting that it can wait us out.
The Contact Group, a side event for defense ministers meeting in Brussels, where allies listen to what Ukraine needs to battle against invading Russian forces and decide what can be provided. Donations, the Kremlin says, are dragging out the conflict and raising the possibility of further escalation. NATO and its partners, however, say support for Ukraine will not stop.
It is important from a Canadian perspective to continually put on the table any aid we possibly have.
Germany, which allowed countries, including Canada, to send Leopard 2 tanks, is also coming to the table with more. It signed a contract to restart production of ammunition for the Gepard anti-aircraft guns, ensuring it could keep supplying Ukraine. Ammunition supplies in general are a critical need in this war. In Ukraine, there's heavy shelling along the front line in the east, part of a brutal Russian campaign that has seen invading forces gaining ground around Bakhmut. This Ukrainian soldier says Russian artillery and mortar attacks have increased from 1 to nearly 10 a day. American experts say talk of Russia launching a new massive attack using fighter jets appears to just be talk, but some kind of spring offensive is anticipated. U.S. Army General Mark Milley, however, outright dismisses Russia.
Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically.
But Russia is still pushing ahead, forcing Ukraine to keep fighting. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Ukraine's neighbor Moldova closed its airspace at one point today and scrambled fighter jets after a balloon-like object was spotted near its border with Ukraine. Once authorities determined there was no threat, air traffic resumed. Moldova has repeatedly accused Russia of plotting to destabilize the former Soviet republic. The president, Maya Sandu, claims Moscow has plans to use foreign saboteurs with military background to overthrow her pro-European government. And last week, Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv had intercepted plans by Russian security services to destroy Moldova. The Kremlin rejects the accusations. In Turkey and Syria, the heartache continues and the death toll keeps rising. More than 40,000 people are now known to have died in the earthquakes, and after more than a week, finding survivors is increasingly rare. It is the dead that are being recovered. In Turkey, the body of a Canadian woman has been found. Samar Zora was found under the rubble of a 5-story building in the city of Antakya. The 33-year-old PhD candidate had traveled to the city for her research in anthropology. The next phase is recovery and relief, though, as Mike Armstrong reports, all hope is not lost.
Days have now stretched into more than a week, and somehow survivors are still being found. This was a man and woman pulled out of a building by rescuers Tuesday evening. Earlier, it was 2 women pulled from another building. But after more than 200 hours trapped, they are alive, but barely. The celebrations are more and more subdued, and they are fewer and fewer. According to reports, there were only 7 rescues on this day in a country where tens of thousands are still missing. The survivor spent his day outside the collapsed building where his niece lived with her 7 roommates. He says he's checked hospitals and crews have gone through the debris. Not a trace has been found, he says. There's absolutely no news. Searches are being called off in some areas as hope fades. Rescue efforts now turn to recovery. According to the World Health Organization, 1 million people in Turkey have been left homeless, and infrastructure damage affects millions more. Many don't have access to clean water or sanitation.
It's a great concern, and it increases the risk of waterborne diseases.
Crews are bringing down dangerous buildings. It's a delicate process, as is organizing disaster relief. Team Rubicon, a veteran-led disaster relief group, has a small team on the ground preparing for a larger deployment. But it says too many groups arriving too early can be a problem.
The World Health Organization and the Turkish Ministry of Health and their government will determine when we deploy, what we deploy to do, and where we'll go.
Tent cities are being built, but many are still in the streets. This family is living in front of their damaged home. The mother says her children cry every day, and she tries to be strong for them. The Turkish government says about 42,000 buildings collapsed or are in urgent need of demolition. The region is also dealing with a mass exodus. More than 150,000 people have left southern Turkey, with more following. This man says he's moving west and starting from zero. He says he wouldn't wish what he's going through on anyone. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
In Syria, more aid is now getting through after 2 more crossing points were opened up on the border with Turkey. 11 relief trucks used one of those new routes today, carrying blankets, jerry cans, and mattresses. The UN now says nearly 9 million people in Syria have been affected by last week's earthquakes. More than 7,400 buildings in that country are completely or partially destroyed. The UN has launched a $397 million funding appeal for Syria, calling it one of the worst disasters in recent memory.
The human suffering from this epic natural disaster should not be made even worse by man-made obstacles. Access, funding, supplies. Aid must get through from all sides to all sides through all routes without any restrictions.
The UN says the funding would benefit nearly 5 million people with the most urgent humanitarian needs over the next 3 months. New Zealand has declared a state of emergency after Cyclone Gabrielle swept through the northern parts of that country. More rain fell in a 24-hour period than New Zealand usually gets in the entire month of February. Landslides and floods have blocked major roads, fallen trees have smashed houses, more than 200,000 people are without power. The military is now helping with evacuations and the distribution of essential supplies in the hardest hit areas. The derailment of a train in Ohio on February 3rd still has residents there concerned about the hazardous and toxic chemicals it was carrying. People in East Palestine, Ohio, have been told they don't need to be concerned about air quality. About 50 of the 150 train cars went off the tracks. A number of them were carrying toxic and carcinogenic chemicals. They caught fire and burned for days. Evacuation orders were issued to about 5,000 people, and controlled detonations were done to release the chemicals, but concerned residents have raised questions about lingering smells, dead fish and chickens, plus possible long-term health effects. In a press conference today, Ohio officials said air quality tests showed readings below safe levels. The first Republican to challenge Donald Trump for the nomination of the Republican Party has made it official. Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor and American ambassador to the UN, announced her plans to seek the nomination for the 2024 presidential election.
Republicans have lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections. That has to change.
Haley had said she would not challenge Trump for the Republican nomination. She now says it's time for generational change. She says what she calls the need for fiscal responsibility prompted her to run. If she wins the nomination and gets elected, she would be the first woman president and the first American president of Indian heritage. They are innovative and badly needed treatments. Coming up, what's being done in Atlantic Canada to help solve the healthcare crisis?